Hi, welcome back to Technical Writing Uncensored. I'm here with Delfina Hoxha, who is an information architect and now an author. So, welcome back. Please tell me about your book.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, about 2 weeks ago, I released my first baby. Can I call it a baby? It's my small
Absolutely.
tiny baby. Ebook, Introduction to Intuitive Information Architecture. It's a guide that I've written for people who are interested in information architecture, either those who don't necessarily work in tech or those who work in tech but more in other roles like product management or software development, technical writing. And I wanted to create a beginner's guide that would be easy to understand and easy to walk through for people who are interested in the field. It's something I've been hearing a lot from people who want to learn more about it but don't necessarily know where to start. And on my own website newsletter, I have a weekly newsletter where I publish information architecture guides. But the issue with the newsletter is just that it is quite disconnected, some of the articles from one another, and I don't necessarily have a strategy for what I publish. So it's a lot of what I hear from client calls or in calls with potential clients or in Slack groups that I'm part of. So kind of questions that people ask related to information architecture. Sometimes just something that I notice in an airport or the train, and I write about it and how it connects to information architecture. And I wanted to put kind of all of those weekly guides into a coherent guide that would be beginner friendly. So I started to kind of outline what I wanted the ebook to teach to the readers. And then I started both extracting some of the information that I've written through every week where I have the newsletter, and then adding some additional information, and then kind of making it more of an ebook format. So kind of flowing everything together. So that was how it started and kind of where it is now. So now it's been live for about 2 weeks, and the reception has been positive, and I'm so glad that I that I did it and that it's out there in the world finally.
Okay. So, why intuitive information architecture? That's an interesting word.
Yeah, so I think information architecture can mean a lot of different things to different people, depending on where they sit in the organizational charts or what their specific day-to-day duties look like. So intuitive, I think, is something that can be more intuitively understood, where no matter which type of information architecture you are working on. So I didn't necessarily want to focus on just website information architecture or information architecture for content management systems or for platforms or for internal platforms. So I didn't want to make it platform specific, even though I do think there are some differences between how we apply information architecture and how we get the information that we need for how users are navigating and finding information in a platform, depending on whether that's a marketing site or a developer site or a documentation platform or an internal platform. But I wanted the focus to be on how can we create these intuitive navigation structures and intuitive information structures, regardless of what platform the person would be working with. So I thought intuitive would be a good way to kind of display that way of thinking, that it wouldn't necessarily be related to just an app or a CMS or a site, but it would be more about what we want the end goal with the information architecture to be. So we want it to be intuitive for the user, but kind of how do we map what intuitive is to our users, and then how do we map that also to the business impact that we want to make with the information architecture we are redesigning. And a lot of what I speak about in the ebook is related to goals and kind of what that intuitive or what success can look like, and how that can be kind of very different depending on the project needs and the user needs.
So it sounds like you're kind of focusing on overarching principles for information architecture. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And actually, one of the chapters is just related to the core principles of information architecture, and it's related to, again, not platform specific, but just like more general, even everyday examples. It's what I've included in the ebook of like making information what I call findable, valuable, and timely. And I have examples on the ebook of like what that looks like in practice and how can we apply some of those principles in the work that we do in digital products. So a lot of the examples that I have are just like everyday things, like in a co-working space or like with the coffee that we have and kind of like how we taste the coffee and how different coffees can taste very different from one another. So I tried to keep it beginner friendly by focusing the examples. And this is like one of the feedback that I've received, that the examples seem to work very well for some people, to focus the examples on everyday scenarios that we are all familiar with, but then to actually explain kind of like how that can relate or translate to the work that we do with digital products. So there's a section in the book, a chapter dedicated to those principles about findability, and then a value, a relevance, and then timeliness.
What was the most interesting or unexpected everyday example that you found?
A lot of the examples that I think about and I've written about in the newsletter, and some I've included in the ebook as well, are just related to transportation. I think part of that is because I live in Vienna, a city with like remarkable public transport, and I come from Albania, a country with questionable, say, public transport. And I was noticing quite a lot when I first moved here, kind of like how they make the public transport work so well. And some of the things that at least I can understand from like as a bystander, which is how they structure the directions of the which side you're going in, kind of like the information they have about where you could be going, the different ways that you could be going there, the accessibility information, and how they make that accessible in a way that's not giving you so much information that you're just lost looking at the maps and the different types of information maps that they have, that they're not necessarily only maps, but they just have these like different content formats, which I love. And it's like a principle, again, I would say, of information architecture. So having these different formats that you are offering the information to the user to. So I've included some of those examples, and I've been thinking about them a lot, and I still think about them, even though I've been living here for a few years now, of just when they create new routes or when they have like the road closures, kind of like how they communicate things and how they communicate the stops and which stops are available where and which times. And I found that fascinating because it is like a lot about going from point A to point B, which is also the point of like a lot of the work that we are doing in digital products, like helping the user get from point A to point B. And it's always super interesting to me to see how they're doing it in other disciplines. So like how the engineers or like the urban planners are thinking about those decisions. And definitely something that I'm also like personally interested in, like learning more how information architecture, like how other people are thinking about information in maybe ways that do not necessarily relate at all to the work that we do as like, technical professionals, let's say.
Yeah, what's kind of similar to information architecture, I find myself noticing things that I kind of file under the UX of everyday life, like good or bad. For instance, I went to a restaurant the other day and there was a group dinner. And so sort of a buffet type of setup. And one of the main dishes was kind of a long quesadilla. And they left a knife there. They didn't pre-cut it into slices for us. So we had to cut it ourselves. And then they left dipping sauce in like the little cups that you would have for a single person. And it was just such a weird thing. It's like, first of all, you're trusting your guests with sharp implements. Second, how are we supposed to get the dipping sauce from these teeny tiny things onto those? You didn't label them. I can't taste it because, it's a shared resource and don't want to get my germs in it. So how am I supposed to use any of these things?
Yeah.
And you'd probably have an information architecture answer for that kind of predicament, probably starting with labels.
Now I'm just thinking about quesadilla, so I can't really help you there. Yeah, but labels would probably be one of the initial starting points of how we solve that issue. But that's an interesting choice for sure.
How does information architecture interact with UX, with the user experience? Because I know that, I kind of intuitively feel like they're almost the same thing, but they're different job titles. So how does that work?
It can depend quite a lot on the company structure, really, and you can be doing the same thing but just have a different title. In my experience, user experience just has like a better PR than information architecture, at least in the specific time frame that we are talking. I don't know if that's going to change. I was seeing actually that there's been quite a big upcharge in like the Google Trends search for information architecture in the last few months, I think, or years. I think it was like in the last year or so that in the worldwide searches there was quite a bit of a uptick in searches for the term. A lot of that I think is stemming from AI and a lot of companies wanting to kind of like going back to what we've been saying for a long time, that the information needs to be structured in a way that makes sense to users and needs to be well structured to like match how they're searching for information, and the labels are acting accordingly to help them find the information they are looking for. But with AI, I think a lot of companies are just being more proactive about doing some of that work. So UX is still, like, I would say, the name of the discipline, and then we also have content design as its own, kind of like separate but still quite related. I think the title is not as relevant as to like the impact that you can do. I think you can have like a user experience title or information architecture or content design or technical writing, and still you can have just like very varying levels of the impact that you are expected to make in the company. So I think it's quite company dependent and then person dependent as well. So I think with information architecture, I really like the interconnectedness aspect of it. So I think you are thinking a lot about like systems, so not necessarily only like microcopy, but it's more like related to just like how the overall system works together, which I think user experience also does. And this is where we get into like what UX is and what IA is. And to me, I'm not as worried, I would say, about like having specific lanes that we go down to with the specifications. But I think it's always good to kind of like have similar, or like to try to understand what the other persons or the other disciplines skill set and just try to complement one another. So if you're working with someone who has like more UX in the part of like prototypes or flows or that aspect of the work, to kind of like help them with the content structure, and then vice versa. But interestingly enough, yeah, the titles thing was just never quite very important to me, which is a bit ironic, because like I'm all about categories and names and labels.
So how do you have to adjust information architecture for like agentic AI versus a human? Or do you?
A lot of the principles I've found remain the same, and it's a lot of what I've written about in the ebook. So kind of like how structure is made and understood by people or by machines. So it's a lot of that just clarity. So like how the information is structured, if it's structured in a way that is timely as well, so you're not overwhelming the user or the machine with just a lot of all the potential relevant information, but you're breaking it down maybe step by step, or just like giving them types of ways to self-select the information that they're looking for. So if a specific developer audience, they have different information that they're looking for. If they're from another audience, they have the ability to kind of like search and find information that's more relevant specifically to them, rather than having to filter through like these long pages of information. And besides, the structure, from what I found, is just a lot of like answering kind of like preemptively as well what the questions might be that the user or a machine might ask. And I think this can be done by just being in contact with the users, or being in contact with departments that are more in contact with users and are like hearing more specifically about what their needs are, what they're struggling with in the platform to find, and ensuring that those things can be easily findable.
What is the most interesting thing that you discovered while writing the book?
Most interesting thing. It was interesting doing some of the structure work for my own ebook, again, because initially I had like all of these, I think I had like more than 50 articles that I had written that I wanted to put together in a way that would be coherent, beginner friendly, helpful. But like I was not necessarily sure in the beginning how to get started with doing that. So I was doing some of like the information architecture for my own ebook. And it was, I think, again, related to the work that I do now as a consultant, with just trying to understand, or like going back to just like what it's the beginning. So what do I want the user to do or be able to do after they read the book? So I tried to break it down by what I would want them to know after they'd read the book, and then try to like adjust the content to what I wanted them to be able to learn or feel like more comfortable about in their day-to-day work afterwards. And I think sometimes with like the lack of someone who is like focused on UX or information architecture, we can very often go like directly to just building. And now it's like easier than ever to build. So we could skip a lot of those steps that are fundamental, in my opinion, to ensuring that we're building something that people actually will use and care about. Because I think, yes, you can build things very quickly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're building something that's good or useful.
Yeah, I am not a fan of the move fast, break stuff mentality.
No, why break it? Like, things are precious. I like things, so I break them.
Yeah, I mean, why not take, half a minute, make a plan, and then run a test? Or think about things first. So, is information architecture just really lots of plans and stuff? Plans and labels?
My first instinct is to say yes. I feel like it is. I feel like with, especially now that I've been doing it like on my own and I'm not part of a team anymore. So I work closer with like client teams, but I'm not part of a team. And I've tried to like put in paper like the process that I have to try to recreate as much, or like reuse some of like the messages or templates that I will be sending to clients throughout the project. And I've realized, like looking at the Notion board, that it is a lot of just like plans and diagrams and communication, which is interesting. But yeah, a lot of planning, a lot of testing. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she was saying that the work is not necessarily creative, which as a creative, I like initially had some like reactions to, because I was like, it is creative. But I understood kind of like what she was saying, in the sense that there is a lot of data of like how people read online, how they get information online, and then what the specific types of things that they can be looking for, that you can get the data from like specific product analytics or website analytics tools. And then, so we have all of this information about human behavior, and then we have this information about data and how they're specifically searching the platform. And yes, a lot of it is straightforward. So we're just like translating some of it. But then I think it is also so creative because you can think that a label that would theoretically make sense based on like the data that you have would be clear. Then you actually hear the user or see the user going through the experience, and then you see that they have like a complete different understanding of a word that seems clear to you. So I think it is quite creative and quite psychological in a way, because they're trying to like understand the way that brains work.
So technology is great when it works.
Just creativity and whether information architecture is creative, and I think it is quite data based and quite like human behavior based, but also it can be very creative, and it should be a little bit, because it should still have like room for trying things out and maybe trying things not necessarily the way that they have been done, but just different ways, and seeing if that resonates with users. If it doesn't, then you can always go back, but there is room for cool stuff to try, and like different types of labels, different types of categories, and it's exciting work, at least to me.
Yeah, it's funny when people hear I'm a technical writer, like, oh, that sounds so boring. It just write instructions. And I mean, I'm with you. It is creative. People don't really understand, but every feature, everything you write is like a puzzle, and you have to figure out the best way to solve the puzzle, because there's not just one way. And like you were saying, with information architecture, sometimes you have a hypothesis, sometimes it pans out, sometimes it doesn't. It just seems really timely for that you're coming out with this book when everyone seems to be trying to figure out the best way to communicate with agents, since they're now the majority of who are visiting the documentation sites.
And I think also with information architecture, and a lot of what you said about there are often in the work that we do different ways to do a thing, and there's not necessarily just one path to do it, and there rarely is. And I think it's one of the most important parts of our work to actually do some of that stakeholder management, which I think will always be kind of like similar regardless of whether we're working with an agent or whatever type of system, that you want the people that are involved to understand like the trade-offs of why something is being made, or like why a term over another. And I think some of those conversations just will never change, and they will always be relevant, and ensuring that you are having those types of conversations is going to be, in a lot of cases, kind of like what makes a project successful or not.
What platforms have you released your ebook on?
This was a learning curve a little bit for me as well, because I am self-hosting it on my website, but I wanted to connect it to my email service provider, which is Kit. But I wanted a way to both register the new people that would be downloading and accessing the ebook, while also having a way to provide the ebook as a resource for already subscribed folks to the newsletter. But then I also wanted to have some data of who the new folks would be, and to not kind of like mix the audiences. So that was a lot of just like looking at YouTube videos to connect and ensure that audiences would not be getting like repetitive emails, or emails that would be kind of like intended for different audiences, for one that may not have been familiar at all with information architecture, rather than like someone who might have been subscribed for a year who's already familiar, but they might want the ebook, or they might want to share it with a colleague. And actually, the first time that I shared it in a WordPress conference here in Vienna, actually. And at the end of the presentation, I shared it with people who were in the room, and I got like a QR code for them to scan in person. So that was fun, and to get like some initial feedback from them. And then from there, I kind of like ensured that it was included correctly and tagged correctly in the Kit newsletter platform.
So if people want to read your ebook, how would they obtain it?
So it would be at littlelanguagemodels.com, and there's an ebook link in the navigation, so it should be quite quick to find. And then they have some information about what's in the ebook, the chapters, what they're going to learn, and then there's a way to download by adding the email address and then getting the relevant information as well in their email address that they've provided.
Cool.
And that's littlelanguagemodels.com, and the ebook should appear quite easily.
There will be a link in the description. So, are you planning on writing more ebooks? How was your experience with this first one?
Yes, I have 2 other planned, which I'm not going to be talking about because I'm a bit afraid of like jinxing things. But they're going to be more for like advanced readers. So for people who may have already done some part of like information architecture work in their day-to-day jobs, but they may have like a specific problem that they're trying to solve and not necessarily the budget to hire someone full-time or to get help from a consultant. So I would want to focus like on very specific problems and things that I've helped clients with, but to also offer this through like a written resource as well.
Very cool.
Stay tuned for more.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, what else should people know about your book and about little language models? Little language models being her consultancy, that is, in case you missed that.
Yes, good call out. There are different ways to find information related to information architecture in the site. One of those is the category. So depending on the goal that you might have with the platform that you work on, you can filter the articles that are already written by specific goals that you have. So you might want to guide users more effectively, or you may be looking more specifically into scaling your content management processes. Maybe it takes a long time to get from like the draft to the publishing of a specific type of content. And I have specific information that I've written throughout the weeks and that I intend to keep writing as I also work on the books that are specific to the goals that you might have, and you can filter and look for that type of information specifically. And then there are also some information architecture breakdowns that I've done of like sites that we're familiar with. I recently did one for Hoka, the shoe brand, and they're doing some very cool stuff in their website with information architecture and some things that I think can be applied for sports and like e-commerce brands specifically. But yeah, there's some good stuff in there, I would say. And if you go to the sites, you should be able to filter and find more relevant information based on where you're at in your information architecture journey.
Any advice for other people who might be considering writing a book?
I would recommend starting step by step. So for me, it worked really well to just write that first article, which was over a year ago now. And I think the goal that I had when I started was to write 20 articles. And I thought that's all that I'm going to need to be doing. I have all the client work as well, so I'm not going to have time to do weekly articles. But then I started, and then you kind of like start to get also more feedback. You just are meeting new people that you would not have met unless you like put yourself out there. And I think book is very intimidating for a lot of us, myself included. And I think when you break it down as much as possible, that's when it starts to become realistic. And it became realistic for me, like when I already had all of this like body of knowledge that I had built week by week. And then I had a goal in mind with like wanting to make it accessible to beginners. But I also already had like all of the experience from the client work and the work that I do day to day, and also the existing pieces that I had written. So that could be something that would work well for others as well, to not say I'm going to write a book, but to say like I'm going to write 5 articles in the next 5 weeks and just see how that feels. Maybe articles are not the right thing for you, and then you decide that actually videos may be like a format that you prefer to share your knowledge in, and then you'll maybe create a podcast or who knows. But I think it's just very valuable, and I've personally like learned so much from what other people have shared, and I think it's super good for the discipline for all of us to be sharing what we know and the feelings that we have about things as well, because sometimes it's just information, but you also have a stance, and that's what like makes you stand out from others. So please share it.
Hey, as a technical communicator, I am all for people sharing information. Well, Delfina, thank you so much for joining me today on Technical Writing Uncensored. Hey, everybody, if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. And talk to us about where you are in your information architecture journey. Leave a comment. I'm interested. And let Delfina know so she can come and give you some answers, maybe. Or reach out to her through Little Language Models or on LinkedIn. And with that, I'll see you on the flip side. Bye.